Hello and welcome to this new episode of the helpful podcast for families with disabled children from the charity Contact. I'm Harriet, Head of Family Support Programmes and host of this podcast. If you're new to Contact, we're a UK-wide charity that supports families with disabled children and those with additional needs. We have lots of free resources and support. Doesn't matter what condition or extra support needs your child has, we're here for you. Visit our website, contact.org.uk, to see how we can help. If you're familiar with us and this podcast, you might have noticed we've not published for a while. We're going to be trying something a little different to what we've done before. In this rebooted series of our podcast, we'll be featuring more interviews and guest contributions, and on the whole, exploring the issues we know families care about in a little more depth. Right, on with the episode. On the 3rd of March, parents in England and Wales were told which secondary school their child has been offered a place at. This is known as National Offer Day in England. Most parents will have received their first choice of school for their child, which will be a huge relief. But for those who didn't, this can be an extremely stressful and uncertain time. So if you're not happy with the secondary school place you've been given for your child, we are here to help. Make sure you listen to the end of this episode where Bridie from Contact's helpline team will be outlining the next steps you can take. But first up, we'll be discussing how parents and children can prepare for the transition from primary to secondary school. Starting secondary school is a big step for any child, but if your child has additional needs, it can be particularly daunting. The good news is there's plenty of practical strategies you can start implementing now to help your child feel ready for this big step in their young lives. Our first guest is very familiar with this process, having navigated it 3 times with her neurodiverse children. She also brings valuable insights from her work as a brain injury lawyer, having supported seriously injured children and their families for over 25 years. Hi Caroline, thanks so much for joining us today. Would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hello Harriet, I'm Caroline Klage and I'm head of the brain injury division at Bolton Kemp. My speciality is working for children with brain injury when they've had injuries as a result of medical negligence or accident. And I'm also mum of 3 wonderful neurodiverse children.
Fantastic. What kind of challenges will parents and children be looking at when moving to secondary school, do you think?
Well, I think the transition for any child is quite tricky. You've got to think of the really nurturing small environment of a primary school where you have one teacher. You might be in one classroom for most of the day. You might go out for music or for PE, but generally you're with the same peers, the same teacher. They get to know you, you get to know them. You then move to secondary school. You've got a bigger campus generally, a bigger footprint. There might be stairs. You've got to find out where you've got to go for different lessons. You've got different teachers. The klaxon, I always remember, was really, really noisy. That sort of heralds the end of a session and the start of a new one. You've got that to deal with. Going in is challenging for some children. They're really bustling, everyone going through the same entrance. That's quite difficult, a bit of sensory overload sometimes for some kids. You've then got all of the organisational challenges. So making sure you've got all of the right equipment, the right books for each lesson, planning that, making sure at break time, you've got time to get what you need for your next lesson, go to the loo, have a snack. And then you've got to make sure you've grasped what's needed in each lesson. Do you know what homework's being set? Can you go home knowing, that you can do what you need to do for that evening and return to school the next day with it all complete? There's just so much to navigate compared to primary school.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think also there's a huge difference for parents as well, isn't there? Because you're so involved in primary school and you take them right to the door and, you might even be involved in hanging coats and bags and what have you. And then you get to secondary school and it's completely different. There's just totally hands off, no involvement whatsoever, isn't it?
I agree. I mean, you've got sometimes independent traveling for the first time. So that's a new challenge. What I've found in my experience as well, because space for lockers is at a premium, I think
Yeah.
sometimes priority is given probably to students who are slightly older than the students who are starting. So it may be that their locker is a long way from their form room. So that's
Yes.
another factor to manage. Communication might not be quite the same. I know at primary school you can speak at the beginning of the day to your child's
Absolutely.
teacher if you've got any concerns, perhaps catch up with them at the end of the day. That is harder to manage in secondary
Much
school.
harder. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally
so
different.
it is different. And also you don't really have the same support you might have with parents that you have at primary school.
Yes.
Um, so you will make friends, of course, but it depends on who your child makes friends with. You don't have the same playground support that,
No,
which
no.
sometimes has to drop your child off. And it's a positive in a weird way because it means your child is getting older and more independent, but that does go.
Yeah, and I think it's an adjustment for parents as much as children, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's right.
Yeah. And of course, children will find this time very anxiety inducing. How can the parents prepare to support their children through this? What can you do to kind of guide them along this way?
I think it's really important always to get children used to how things might be. And that's difficult because until they're actually in it, they won't fully know. But you can try to familiarize your child with how things might be. The best way is to see if the school will allow you to take some video footage or if they can provide some or some photographs so your child can look at the environment. There will be transition days, and schools are quite good at that. But I think if your child has additional needs, probably the one day that's offered is not enough and you want to start earlier. So you want to see if you can go in earlier with your child to have a tour, maybe on what is a calmer day. Um, Look at the entrance where they'll be going in, the classrooms, the setup. The other thing you might want to consider is if you think your child's going to struggle with going into school with lots of other people, then whether there is a separate entrance or a quieter entrance or a softer start that can be accommodated for your child to make the school day a little bit less frenetic, a bit less
Yeah, that's
overwhelming.
a
And
really good idea.
well, I think schools understand it because I mean, I've had this discussion when I've been applying for transport for some of my children, and they've been fortunate enough to have transport, and there is a school bus, but the notion of going on the school bus is almost like having a bottle of fizzy drink and shaking it because there's so much going on, so many people on
Yeah,
the coach, and you can't
absolutely.
control the environment or the noise. Whereas going on transport, which is a smaller minibus with an escort, it's much
Yeah.
calmer. The child arrives at school regulated, ready to learn. They haven't already had a disruptive start to the day. And you want to just make sure that the start to the day is as calm as it possibly can be.
Yeah.
And, prepare well in ahead. You need to make sure you've got everything that's needed. You need to support your child. I know sometimes you might think, well, I've had a neurotypical child. They can organize themselves quite well. I need my child to do the same. But actually, you don't. You want to make sure the night before everything is ready, that you've removed any potential trigger
Yes.
for anxiety in the morning. So you don't want with a limited period of time, and you've got to leave the house at a certain amount of time for something to be missing, and then there's a panic. Well, everyone
Yes.
tries to find it. If it's cookery, you need to have the apron. If it's science, the lab coat. PE, the kit needs to be ready. Packed lunch, all of that stuff ought to be all done so that in the morning it's really seamless
Yes,
to give your
absolutely.
child the best start to the day. And you can get into those habits whilst your child's still in primary school,
Yes. Yeah,
because it's
definitely.
really difficult. But when someone's under pressure, the smallest thing can just derail them. And I know we all want to build resilience, and I do understand that. But we know with neurodiverse children that routine is really, really important.
Yes, absolutely. And you can kind of increase that independence as the time goes on, but those initial sort of weeks starting a new school needs to be really kind of supported, doesn't it? My son's also neurodiverse, and when he moved to secondary school, I arranged a walk round the school after school so he could see where his class was and, where the toilets were and all that kind of stuff when there weren't other people around. Um, and that seemed to help a fair bit, I think. So it's just those kind of little things you can do.
I think it's a really good idea. You can, and you can have a plan, you can have a map so you can see where everything is.
Yeah.
Lists are good as well. You're talking about encouraging independence, a little checklist if you've done this, done that, if you don't want it. And actually, then you can do it with your child and then leave everything somewhere visible by the front door. And don't do what I do sometimes and put things in such a safe place. I can't quite remember where that safe place is.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we had a checklist on the back of the front door. So before we left, have we got
Yeah,
PE kits, lunchbox, coat, etc.
that's a really good idea. I say even having almost a trug or something that you can just dump everything in
Yes,
one place.
yes,
I know it's not the most beautifully visible thing in your hallway, but it's all there. And I think we put the PE kit there to start with because then where to go and your child knows
yes,
where to go.
absolutely. I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
And things like charging the phone. I know some smartphones are being phased out, but lots of kids have brick phones. You need to make sure that's charged the night before. You don't want the panic of going and then it's not charged. So
No,
I think lists are really good, and you can devise your list in advance and get used to doing all of these things whilst if your child needs or will be having a brick phone to go to secondary school, get that brick phone for the last term of primary school so they can be
absolutely.
using it then, and just let your primary school know that's what you're doing,
Yes.
so that they get used to it and it's not a new thing from day one, and you're in the
Yes.
habit of charging it at night, packing it the next morning, etc.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's getting into habits and, making these things routine. I remember
Yeah.
when my son started, they had lanyards. And if I'd had that box where you just put everything, that would have been so much easier because he would take this lanyard off, when he got home from school, and who knows where that would end up. And so we'd every morning spend time looking for it. So, yeah, I think that's a great idea. Just put everything in one place and then you're not spending hours, in a panic before you leave.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's difficult because there will always inevitably be something.
Oh,
And
yes.
then if it happens, it's really difficult, but you just try and stay calm. And
Yeah.
whatever you get, we all do this. As adults, we do it. The way we're feeling plays out in our behavior. And
Yes.
it is just a way of communicating sometimes. So if a child is feeling really overwhelmed or super anxious, if they lash out or they say things that aren't the nicest things, it's just a way of them trying to communicate they're stressed, and just don't take it personally. Just try and stay calm. And I know that's hard, but losing it's just going to make it worse and add to the anxiety. And if you've had a conversation with the school and hopefully with the Senko, you can explain. So if your child is a little bit late or if there's an issue, then they won't, they will understand. And that's really, those lines of communication are really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important to note because, there are penalties for everything nowadays, being late, not having your lanyard, not having your homework diary.
Mm.
So making them aware that those things are things, your child might struggle with is really important.
And I mean, the other thing I would say, and as you'll know, Harriet, every child is different. There's no one child that fits the mold of a particular diagnosis.
No,
And that can be the difficulty for some schools. And we need to work with them to educate them. Don't lose it with the school. They want to help. Sometimes you may not feel they're being as helpful as you'd like them to be. But if you lose the relationship with them, you can't work with them anymore. And it may be your child is the child, you can go two ways sometimes. There might be a child who's always interrupting, and you can explain that so that that child
yes,
isn't wrongly punished for that. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got the child that is mortified if they're picked on and they will just freeze. And
yes,
whichever way, you need to be explaining, this is how my child is. and asking, and you really need a diagnosis for this. You don't necessarily need an EHC plan, but if you have a diagnosis, if you have a nice, helpful Senko, and I've been so blessed with all the Senkos I've dealt with, but they will prepare a passport. And on that, you can have some input. But if your child struggles and if they're going to freeze if they're picked on and it's going to make it hard for them to come into school, then that can be noted on the passport. So a teacher knows just to look for that child to contribute in a different way, or to check after the lesson, is the child okay, rather than picking on them in the class to answer a question, which you don't want in these first few weeks for your child to have a negative experience that then puts them off going back in when it's hard for them to go in anyway, because this is a huge change. And schools understand that. They don't want your child to become a school refuser. And that's why actually so many secondary schools do have good transition programs now. I have to say, I think it's so much different to when I was at school those years ago. But a passport is a really good idea. And you can, again, that's something you can develop maybe with your Senko in primary school, with whom you might have a really nice relationship because you've been there for so many years and they know your child well. And then you can ask your Senko to liaise with the new Senko and to devise a passport suitable for secondary school.
I think that's such an important point, actually, because those secondary school teachers are going to see your child for 1, 2, maybe 3 hours a week, whereas their current primary school teacher knows them inside out and upside down because they're with them all day. But when they're just seeing them for brief snippets, they're not going to pick up all those subtleties. They're not going to remember for each child because there's so many children going through those doors. So that passport can really be such an important key, can't it?
I think so. And I also think if you've got a good relationship with your Senko, you need to use that to compellingly prove to the Senko at your child's new school that your child has needs. Because I know it's difficult, this, but secondary schools are so busy. Teachers are under huge pressures. You can, of course, advocate for your child, but it will sound all the more compelling if you have a professional on hand from a school who is seen as more objective, who can make that case as well.
Absolutely.
So often, I know I had this with a transition a few years back, but you will be asked to give some information on background if there's anything that concerns you. Most secondary schools ask that, and you can provide your summary of information. But if you can ask your Senko to support you in that, or to have a conversation or put something in writing for the Senko at the secondary school, that will really help your child. So use that. That's a really good resource that's there that I think a lot of parents don't realise. And probably at primary schools, it's not something that Senkos volunteer because, again, they're really busy and under pressure. But if you ask for it, I'm sure most would be happy to help.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And that continuity, and as you say, that professional advocate will be so helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, our final thing is I believe you have some top tips to share with us for children transitioning.
Yeah, well, I think some of them I've covered in our conversation.
I'm sure.
Sorry, because I'm rambling on, Harriet, but I'll go through them again. Just so really, I think the first thing is diagnosis. It really helps you to have a diagnosis because there are so many children with competing needs. But the school absolutely has to pay attention if there's a diagnosis, and it means that there are things that have to be done and put in place. Not necessarily an EHC plan, but with a diagnosis, you have access to a Senko. I'm not saying you can't without that. And if you're going through the process of getting a diagnosis, you can tell your Senko that too, and you can summarize the issues. But if you can get a diagnosis, first of all, that will help you. And then try to meet with the Senko as soon as you possibly can. As I've said, just now, we've been discussing, get your current Senko to have a conversation with the Senko at the secondary school and see if you can get this passport sorted out early on. And as we've just discussed, and your idea was a brilliant one, taking your son around the school after school, well before he started, that's a really good idea. So an additional school tour rather than just waiting for the transition day. So these things are just key. And also, if there are things your child struggles with, you need to have those conversations with the Senko to see what adjustments or accommodations can be made. So I was saying earlier, does your child have to go through the same door as everyone else? Can they go in a bit earlier and just go and sit in their form quietly, rather than, what time does the school open? Is it possible to do that to avoid that last minute rush?
Yes.
The other thing, and I know that in secondary school, Senkos will deploy form teachers to check in. And I think that's quite nice because it doesn't single out the young person. It's really
Yes.
difficult because children just want to fit in. They don't want to be seen as different. So if your child does need someone to check in with them, you want it to be done in a discreet way. Can they arrive a little bit earlier than the others and have a chat, or can the form teacher discreetly have a chat, and also the same at the end of the school day, so that if there are any issues, they're swept up and addressed?
Absolutely.
So those things I think are important. Then, rest breaks, you need to think about whether your child would struggle with stairs and things like that. If so, your child might need a bit longer to get to lessons. So you might need to ask that the child leave a little bit earlier, one lesson, to get to the next lesson on time, because
Yes.
there is quite a large area to cover in some secondary schools compared with primary schools.
Absolutely.
The other thing that I've come across through my work is disabled loos. They must be disabled loos. Children that need to access the disabled loo cannot wait for it often. They need to be able to get in. If other people are using that loo, it's really problematic. So if your child is in that boat, you would like to seek, I think, reassurance from the Senko that those loos will be accessible when your child needs them. Because
Definitely.
it's so easy to slip into a loo if it's free rather than queue, but disabled loos exist for a reason.
Yes. And
so
often they're encouraged to go to the loo at break and lunch and no other time. So sometimes they'll give a pass if a child, needs to go at other times. So it's important to sort of be aware of those kind of things and get that in place before it becomes an issue. So if your child needs to access the toilet at short notice or whenever it suits them, then get those toilet passes in place from day one.
I agree entirely. It's something that you could add to the passport, because the difficulty you have is if there is a horrible situation, that's going to be so off-putting for your child. And it's not in the school's interest. And I know what you're battling against sometimes is, well, if we allow this child to do it, then all the other children will think they can do it. But that isn't the case at all. I mean, if a child has needs, they have needs, and they should be accommodated.
Yes.
And the implications of not being are really not good at all, because it makes school a really horrible place to be then.
Yes.
So I think that's a good idea, asking for the pass. And then I think you need to look, if you can, at the social side. It's not, I with a provision, one of my kids there was a lovely mum of someone that my son is still friends with, and she organised a meet up in a park. But that was easier to do because in the provision there was a class of 6 or 7. And so that was really valuable, though, and that was years and years ago, but all of the kids in that group knew one another. It's harder to do in a mainstream class, but there may be children from the same primary school who are going to your child's secondary. So if they're not already that friendly with those children, if you think that those children might be kind, amenable children to meeting up, then you could see if you could organise something, so that at least that there's a friendly face.
Definitely.
So I think that's worth considering. And then think of practical tools, organising anything that helps them organise themselves. We were talking about your list on the back of the door, which I think is excellent. Colour-coded timetables or labels, folders for each subject, planners. You want to have storage in their rooms or wherever they do their work, so they can identify that there's one place where they can put all their books and they don't get lost.
Yes.
I love my support team at work are so good, because they're just used to laminating everything. I think these things,
yes,
because you don't want the timetable to get damp or dog-eared or destroyed. And if you can't access a laminator through your work, consider getting a laminator, because they're really, really helpful.
Yeah, and get a copy of that timetable, because absolutely, they're bound to lose it.
They are. Ask for 2. One can be emailed to you sometimes. And then really it's those routines that we spoke about that you can put in place. And often I find, and I have 3 children now, and the youngest is now at secondary, they do sort of mature once they get to that final year of primary school. So you can achieve quite a lot in that last term after the ghastly SATs are out of the way.
Yes.
But then you have the school trip, so that's a challenge in itself, I know, but it is a time to capitalize on trying to develop independence because their peers will be doing that. So you might want to start a bit of independent traveling then if you feel it's safe.
Yes.
Introduce the brick phone, as I was saying, if you're not allowed to take a smartphone to school, so that they're used to using that and charging it.
Yes.
I know it's difficult because the book situation is different, but you might want to say, let's start having packed lunches. It's the summer, so that they can get in the habit of doing that as well, and checking bottles of pills and that kind of thing. So start doing that. Also, the other thing I think that's important, especially on Sundays and weeknights, I found that if my kids, if their evening wind down is disrupted, it affects them the next day.
Yes.
So it may be they've gone out. Parties, sometimes you go to a party and it might be later because like a bowling party or 3 PM on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult because your child wants to go, but then they come back later and it really imperils the next morning. So you just need to be aware of that. And or to see
plan ahead a bit.
If you're planning anything yourself, do it earlier so that you can have that nice wind down. Sunday night, and the same in the week, and then just check in with them, see how they're doing. I know if you ask your child, how was your day, how are you, you don't get much, but you do notice signs if they're not eating or they're not as perky and as they might be. So I think just monitor those things. And I hope it goes well for everybody. And if you feel that they're struggling with the curriculum and they don't have an EHC pen, then you need to consider whether or not that's something that would help them.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a huge transition, a huge time in a child's life and a parent's life. But I think if you can get these kind of preparations and plans and routines in place before they start, then everything's not a huge change when they do start in the September.
I agree. And even things like uniform, try it on. I know it's a bit odd. It feels a bit odd. But if you're someone who is a little bit sensory, I mean, it does bring me up this. I don't know why they just can't wear tracksuits to school. You look at the way things are now in the workplace.
Yes,
we're
so
not
informal
wearing suits all the time anymore. And I think stiff collars, ties, blazers, buttons. If you're having to wear these things, then start to try them on early, because it's just one more thing. And if you're a bit dysregulated in your first day of school, that's going to feel even worse. So try those things on. Buy them early as well. I know it's hard because people think, I'm not buying it early, it's really expensive, my child's going to grow, I'm going to leave it later. Don't do that. Go a bit early. And also you might want to consider the second-hand stuff because it will be softer. Actually.
That's true. Yes, it will
be softer than the new stuff. And most schools will have an outlet for that. So it's worth contacting them and seeing. So and the other thing, and this always surprises me, and I don't know why it shouldn't, how a coat feels on top of a blazer.
Yes.
That you need to try, because it can just derail you if it's
absolutely.
I have to say, I don't think I'd be keen to wear a blazer with a puffer jacket on top.
No.
But you've got time to try these things.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And that's the key, isn't it? Starting all of this preparation way before that September is really the key.
Yeah.
But it's also an exciting time and new opportunities for kids and the families. So I think the more prepared you are, the less stressful it will feel, and then hopefully positive.
I agree. And I have to say, I think schools are really good with this. I mean, provisions get it completely because they just want the children to be in. And I think they really make the first term probably feels a bit the way primary school does, because it's getting that routine sorted. But also, I think mainstream secondaries are getting better. And my experience of that has been really positive, and I know they do lots of positive activities in the first year as well to try to encourage
They
kids
do.
to come in. And also, I think some schools, one of my child's schools did this. They will talk to the primary school teacher, and the child will be in a class with one of their friends. And actually,
Yes,
that's really good for meeting friends, because you sort of meet friends in pairs, and it gives you confidence
absolutely.
if you're with someone who knows you, so you're automatically more confident than you meet another pair in the same. And so that is a really, really good system. And
Yeah, I think
actually,
that happens a lot more now, doesn't it?
yeah, but if it isn't happening at your, and that's something you might want to ask. That's, I didn't mention this, when you're looking at secondary schools, ask, what is the transition process? What do you do to help the child feel at home? Because if these things aren't in place, then there should be a few alarm bells. Perhaps this isn't the school. So
Yes,
things like that are really reassuring, I think. Um,
definitely.
and then the other things that you might want to consider, if your child struggles socially, there are good social skills courses. There was a
Yes.
peers course, and one of my kids went on this, and it was run by, and it's the late Dr. Lucy Brown, right, who was a force of nature, but tragically passed away last year. But she
Right.
ran this course with Leonie Kenny, who's a super salt. And it's a really, really lovely, they handpick a group of 7 or 8. You have to want to do it,
Yes.
otherwise it doesn't work, and you have to see the course through, otherwise if someone leaves it disrupts it. But they
Right.
give social coaching to this group of young people, and at the same time to parents in another room, where they're
Oh,
trying to teach you. And
interesting.
it's really interesting, because we sort of assume we learn the art of conversation. We're not taught it, we pick it up, but that's harder for neurodiverse people. So we're having this
Absolutely.
conversation, Harriet. You're asking me a question and I'm responding. And then I might, in a normal conversation, do a follow-up question. But
Yes.
that doesn't get taught to us, does it? So
No,
they teach this in a really lovely, supportive environment. And I think that's invaluable for building confidence and having that toolkit. So
absolutely.
that's something you might want to consider, that's really,
Mm.
really helpful. Um,
And there's all sorts of after school clubs and things that, just doing those social things can really help with learning those skills. Because you're right, we don't just magically know how to do it. It's something you have to learn.
that's it. And I think, you have to be careful, because you could just sometimes encourage it. I mean, what it taught me, it encourages your child, if they want to have conversation and sustain conversations and interactions with people, you have to have a wide range of interests. You can't go niche. This is what Lucy used to say: don't go niche.
Yes,
We all have our niche areas, you know.
absolutely.
But if you're going on about your specialist subject, it may not be the other person's specialist subject. So, but there are things that actually you could acceptably talk about. And the
Yes.
big things are, what did you do at the weekend? What are you doing this weekend? Film. I've just been to see Captain America. It was brilliant. That would be a good one. You
Ah,
see Captain America. Or so really what you want to do as a parent is try to encourage your children to do a few things which could be a nice topic of conversation, so that
yes.
when they meeting new people, they can ask these questions. Have you seen this? What did you do?
Yes, that's
What have
such a
you
good
been watching
point.
on television? There might be something that is of the moment that I mean, I never
Yes.
watched it, but things like Stranger Things for slightly older children was a good thing to
Yes, that was
talk about.
huge. Yeah,
Um, Food is a good one. We can all coalesce around, what do you like to eat?
absolutely.
So you have to have, a music as another. And if you can try and develop some of these interests in your child as well, so they've got a wider range of topics to talk about and have those
Yes,
conversations. And we have to try to model behavior at home as
absolutely.
adults,
Yeah.
and have these conversations too. And I know sometimes some of my kids don't want to do it, but I sort of make them
Yes.
about your day. Would you like to ask me now?
Not really. Yeah, no, I think that's so true. It's all about modeling, isn't it? And, when you're sitting at dinner or if you're on a car journey or something, those are great times to just try a few questions and kind of encourage them to ask things back.
That's it. That's it. So, and also as a parent, just I think you've probably got superpowers anyway if you're tuning into this, because you're wanting to find out more and more about what you can do to help and support your child, and that is so to be applauded. And just
Absolutely.
remember, any behavior is communication. That's the top tip.
Yes.
I remember years ago, one of mine, I didn't understand sensory needs, and I still feel really guilty about this, but I was trying to force on these scratchy school trousers because we were so late for school,
Yes.
getting them all
Yes.
ready. And one was a baby, the other was just, don't know what they were doing. I had to just ignore it to try and get these trousers on. And they accidentally just kicked out, but they didn't mean it. At the time, I thought, oh, they've kicked me in the mouth. That's really all. I thought devil child, not devil child at all. From their perspective, it was really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
In the end, I got to school in jeans, and I was so lucky because the teacher said, "You've just got to pick your battles. This is fine."
That's so true.
So old and soft. And then I had an OT assessment, a sensory OT assessment, and the OT was able to explain, and I understood it. And it was just the child trying to communicate to me, "This is really uncomfortable, and I can't do it."
But you don't know until you know, do you? And I think it's being open to learning all the time.
Yeah, and that's where sometimes I think diagnoses are helpful, because
Yes.
they give you that permission to accept it.
Yeah.
That actually,
and a framework.
And then you can go off and you can get tips and tricks. And I know it's difficult. People think, oh, where are all these diagnoses coming from? But you'll remember, Harriet, I know there were people at school with me that should have had diagnoses, but we were not very open
Not
about
at all.
neurodiversity then. And life would have been so much easier for them had we all understood. And they just must have had such a terrible time and been really confused and overwhelmed the whole time. So it's a positive thing, I think, because it means that you can get the help you need. And actually, with the child who's slightly older and is struggling to understand some of the things that are going on, it helps them because they can discover. It's empowering. They can work out there might be the way they are, that actually it's fine, because the conversation now is, it's not about like a disorder, it's about, condition. We talk about autism spectrum condition. We don't talk about disorder anymore.
Yes.
We talk about neurodiverse.
And that language is so important, isn't it? And giving them the skills and the tools to understand themselves and to be able to kind of understand themselves within their world as well is just key. Yeah,
I think so. I think there's a piece to that. So I think that's really, really important. And we're fortunate. Things are moving in the right direction. I mean, the resources are there. They need to be there. But I think my kids span 13 through to 20. But when getting diagnoses, the way it's labelled has changed so much. I've seen it and I wish actually when my 20-year-old had been diagnosed that the language had been different, because it would have been easy to have explained it to him. Because it is positive. They're wonderful.
Yeah. So, oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's moving in the right direction. We've just got to keep banging the drum and shouting from the rooftops about the amazing things these kids can do.
I think that's right. And it's about creating the right environment and having the understanding.
Yes.
So that they can function optimally and play a role in it. We're talking about school life, but in secondary school life. And there's no reason why not. It just requires a little bit of understanding.
Well, hopefully this podcast will have shed some light and given some understanding for people on this huge topic.
A huge thank you to Caroline for talking to us today. So many useful tips for parents to get started with, which I'm sure will be a huge help to families. Up next, we'll be discussing National Offer Day, but just a few caveats to cover before we dive into the topic. National Offer Day applies in England, but the same date applied in Wales. In Northern Ireland, post-primary school places will be sent out on the 10th of May, and in Scotland, no offers are made as councils decide where pupils are placed. National Offer Day also only applies to children without an education, health and care plan, otherwise known as an EHC plan, or an independent development plan in Wales. So this advice is only relevant if you're based in England or Wales and your child does not have an EHC or independent development plan. If your child does have an EHC or independent development plan, we have information on our website about the applications process. Visit www.contact.org.uk/education. Okay, so what is National Offer Day? When parents apply for a secondary school place for their child, they fill in a single form and state the schools they'd like in order of preference. On the 3rd of March, thousands of parents in England and Wales were offered a place for their child at one of their secondary schools for Year 7. For many parents, this will be their first preference of school when they made their applications. If not, it might be one of their other preferences. But unfortunately, some families will be disappointed that their child has not been offered the school they wanted. So today we're going to discuss what you can do if your child hasn't received a school place you're happy with. So we have Bridie here from the helpline. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Harriet. Nice to be with you here today. So yes, I work on the helpline every day and take lots of calls from parents on a variety of subjects, including National Offer Day.
So can you tell me what happens on Secondary School National Offer Day?
Yes, of course, no problem. This is the day that secondary school offers are made by local authorities in England and Wales. Parents and carers will receive the offer by email, or they will log on to the local authority website to see their offer of a school place. And they'll receive one single offer of a school place. The admissions arrangements and criteria which are used to allocate places can be found in a variety of places depending on the type of school. These criteria are set by the local authority for community schools and some church schools. All other state-funded schools are set by the governors of those schools, or with academies, they are set by the Academy Trust. Just check your local authority and school website and you'll find the information you need.
And do parents have to accept the school place they've been offered?
It's totally understandable to feel upset if your child didn't get into your first choice school. And that can definitely be worrying when you think of their next steps. But the advice I'd give is this. First of all, in England, you need to accept the place you've been offered by the deadline you've been given in your offer letter to secure a school place. In Wales, you may be required to do this. Check your letter carefully. So even if it's not ideal, accept your offered place. Why, you ask? Well, because accepting it guarantees your child a place and you don't want to risk losing that opportunity altogether.
So if they don't accept, then there's no placement for their child?
There will be no place. Once they've accepted the place they've been offered, even if it's not their first choice, then they can also use their right to lodge an appeal. Appealing is like a formal way of requesting and explaining why you think your child should be in your preferred school and why it's a better fit. If your appeal is successful, you can withdraw the acceptance later, but it's really important to take these steps. If you didn't get your preferred school, then you'll automatically be added to the waiting lists of schools that you ranked higher than the school you've been offered. A lot of parents don't realise that. So it's a good idea to just double check that this has happened. You'll also be contacted in writing if offers come available from those schools.
Okay.
You can also add your child to as many waiting lists as you wish. Typically, these stay open until the end of August in England, but check with your local admissions team to be certain. In Wales, it's required that waiting lists are maintained until 30th of September, where schools are oversubscribed. Make sure your child is on the waiting list that you want.
Okay, so there's a good amount of time that, things could change in. Nothing's going to be, that's it, signed, sealed, delivered immediately. There's opportunities for changes.
Absolutely. You can also apply to other schools not on your original list. So check admissions for any spaces. It's all about exploring all the options that are available to you.
And have you got any advice for parents who've not been offered any of the schools that they wanted?
Most importantly, as I said, accept the offer that you've been given. Try to keep calm and lodge an appeal. I'll talk about that now, how to do that and go about it. To appeal, follow the instructions on your offer letter. If you can't find your offer letter, check with the local authority admissions department on how to appeal in your local area. Use the offer letter and eligibility criteria that you find in the admissions code on your local authority or school website to try and understand why the place was not offered for your preferred school, and then use this criteria to help you write your appeal. Try to provide evidence as well to back up your reasoning. So the more detail you've got, the better. If there was any mistakes as well in the admissions process, or you think it wasn't followed properly once you check the admissions information at your school or local authority, you can also use that in your appeal as well.
Okay, that's good to know.
There's all in your appeal, it's important that you focus on why you think the school you want is more suitable, not why you think the school you've been offered is not suitable.
Right, that makes sense. Okay. So you're focusing on the positives.
Yes. After the first round of places are offered, admissions then have to follow their oversubscription criteria to allocate any further places. These allocations are based on children who are most eligible when they follow the oversubscription criteria. So you can also check the oversubscription criteria as well, which will be on the admissions information, to see how likely your child is to get a place, and that can help you also add more reasons to your appeal. It's important to follow the appeals advice on your offer letter, and that will give you the best shot. Also, if the appeals process feels overwhelming, the adjustments can be made for you. So, for example, translation of documents or help with writing your appeal, just reach out to the local authority admissions department for that.
And they'll be very used to doing that, won't they? And very, keen to help and support.
Yes, and so they should as well, because it's about making adjustments so that everybody can access the same process and it's fair for everyone.
Okay, thank you.
In England, you typically get 20 days after your offer to submit your appeal, but in some cases, deadlines are up to 40 school days after. So check your offer letter or the admissions website, as deadlines can vary. For Wales, you must be allowed at least 10 working days from your notification that your application was unsuccessful to submit an appeal. Once you've sent your appeal, you'll receive an acknowledgement, then a hearing date and a deadline for submitting your evidence. After the hearing, decisions are made in 5 working days.
And it sounds like you won't be left hanging around waiting to know. 5 days is quite manageable, isn't it?
Yeah. Please be aware that if your appeal's late, though, over the 40 or 20 days that they give you in your area, then it can only be considered after all the other appeals that were on time. So it's important to stick to those deadlines.
Okay, thank you.
It might happen that after the appeal, you have to come to terms with the fact that nothing can be changed. That's really hard for people, and they can often feel really helpless and down, but it's important to reach out. There's always other people there to help you process this and accept the situation. If you don't win your appeal, you could always make contact with the school that you've been offered and request a meeting to discuss any worries with them. But remember, the main thing is accept your place you're offered first, so you do have a school place.
Okay, thank you. And could there be some families who aren't offered a place at all?
Well, local authorities are required by law to provide a place for every child at secondary school, but that doesn't mean it will be your first choice, but they will offer a place at another school.
Okay.
It would be an unusual event, but if you didn't receive an offer letter on the 3rd of March, it's important you get in touch with the local authority or school admissions straight away, because they can advise you what to do.
So basically, you need to accept your placement, and then if you want to appeal, you need to do that within the timescale. So be really clear about what timescales your particular school is working to.
That's correct. Always check the information you've got, or access the information online, or ring up the admissions or the school.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Bridie. And finally, where can parents go if they want to find out more about this topic?
It can be a real roller coaster, but there's a lot of advice out there. So our main takeaways are: remain calm, accept the place that you've been offered, consider joining waiting lists, and lodge an appeal if you wish. Just a reminder that all the advice is in your offer letter. Admissions information is on either your local authority website or the school website. Also, we have all this information on our website as well. If you go to contact.org.uk/education. And we also posted a news story in our news and views section on the 3rd of March about this subject as well. Or you can always call our helpline to speak to one of the advisors on there. And the number is 0808 808 3555. And they can offer you more personalised advice if you need it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Bridie. That's been really informative. I know it's a really stressful time for parents, so having things explained clearly is really, really helpful.
Always happy to help.
That's it for this episode. We hope you found it useful. You can find out more about National Offer Day, applying for school, and many more education topics for all UK families on our website, www.contact.org.uk/